الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. يسألك الناس عن الساعة قل إنما علمها عند الله وما يدريك لعل الساعة تكون قريبا إن الله لعن الكافرين وأعد لهم سعيرا خالدين فيها أبدا لا يجدون وليا ولا نصيرا يوم تقلب وجوههم في النار يقولون يا ليتنا أطعنا الله وأطعنا الرسولا وقالوا ربنا إنا أطعنا سادتنا وكبراءنا فأضلونا السبيلا ربنا آتهم ضعفين من العذاب والعنهم لعنا كبيرا. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بأصحاب الفيل ألم يجعل كيدهم في تضليل وأرسل عليهم طيرا أبابيل ترميهم بحجارة من سجيل فجعلهم كعصف مأكول. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. استغفر الله. الله قسم.
sleep. Okay. If it's plugged in there, it doesn't sleep. Is it long enough?
Yeah, just about.
Otherwise, you have extensions here.
Just a little bit.
Sound like this? Oh, I'm ready. I knew what was going on. I figured it out. Oh, I got this.
आप जहाँ मर्जी बैठना चाहे बैठ जाए खुली छूट
You just you want to sit here and do it? Yeah. Not like up there.
No, the wire won't just pop over there. So the
Mic wire.
mic wire on there.
They want me to have it up there.
They have it up there. They're fine with themselves. So they'll just be around.
I'm just gonna grab my notes. So don't miss
Okay.
it.
Sure. If you want, I could put you over there.
It doesn't matter. Just so that's easier for them to see. So I can switch back.
Okay.
There's some audio. Would they be able to? There's some audio in the video. So if I just put the volume up all the way, put the mic next to it, you're still pretty loud.
That should be okay. Hopefully. Actually, they just go into the system.
That's good.
I don't know how to
Okay, I'll just put the mic down next to it.
Okay.
So move. Does that?
I don't know, whatever's better for you.
Fine, come on.
Oh, slow.
Hold on, it's just a repeat of the
No,
last one.
I brought family, so
Oh, okay.
that's the main reason I can't.
I'm gonna bore you.
Let's do this one.
And then May 12th, I'm coming to Safat.
Whose is this? Is this yours?
I don't know how you drop that.
I'm gonna just do a quick intro and you'll find it'll just only this show on there. You can go back and forth and it'll be okay.
Just okay.
Okay, 1 second. Do this because it's online.
Okay.
Just do that. Okay?
So from here, I can just go.
Yeah. And there you can go. There might be a slight lag, but it shouldn't be too bad. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين الصلاة والسلام على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين جزى الله عنا محمدا صلى الله عليه وسلم بما هو أهله اللهم صل وسلم أشرف الصلاة والتسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. First and foremost, I want to say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to everyone. I want to welcome those that are familiar to the masjid and those that are new. Once again, it is unfortunate the circumstances that gather us today. However, it is important for us to learn about what is the situation that is actually occurring in Gaza. In Gaza, what is the situation on the ground? In our age, there's a lot of news that is out there, and it becomes difficult when you have so much information coming out, when there's so much of it, to determine what is right, what is wrong, what is truth, and what is not. So there's nothing that could stand for truth, there's nothing that could be more revealing of what is the truth than an eyewitness account of someone that we are all familiar with, someone that was born and bred here, someone that was raised here, someone that went to school here, someone that works here, that went on a medical mission to see what is the situation on the ground, and they're essentially reporting back to us. So inshallah, without further ado, I'm going to ask our respected guest, Sheikh Dr. Mateen, to discuss, to present what is it that he saw, what is it that he witnessed when he went into Gaza. And during this time, I want to humbly ask everyone to really pay attention. If you can, if you have small children with you, that's great, but please keep them with you. We want to make sure everyone is able to fully benefit. We want to make sure that everyone is able to they're able to fully realize what is happening, and they're able to fully be captured by the events that took place and what is it that he witnessed, inshallah ta'ala. For those that are recording, inshallah, it's recording on YouTube, so you don't need to record it. Okay? So inshallah, without further ado, I'm going to ask Sheikh Dr. Mateen to begin.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين لله شهداء بالقسط ولا يجرمنكم شنآن قوم على ألا تعدلوا اعدلوا هو أقرب للتقوى واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون صدق الله العظيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك وسلم. As Imam Nu'man was saying, shortly in the very beginning of Ramadan, this opportunity presented itself to me. One of my friends in Canada, he called out of the blue and he said, I'm going to Gaza, do you want to come? And up until that point, we know that the situation that we were in, sitting here in the United States, marches, protests, bans, divestment, whatever it is that we could do, we were trying to do. But this was an opportunity where I could do something with my hands. I could do something with that which Allah has given me some knowledge of, which is my training. And it was a no-brainer essentially at that time when I was asked to do this. And what I'd like to do tonight is show you this tale. You're going to go through some stories, you're going to hear some things. I know all of us have read things on the news, seen things in video, but it's different when you actually go there. It'll be different when I show you pictures and I tell you first-hand stories of what actually I saw. And me, I'm just seeing a little sliver. There's so much more taking place. But I'd like to start off by reminding ourselves that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs us about justice. In the ayah that I recited, He said, O believers, stand for Allah as witnesses for justice. This is a command that as Muslims, Islam, one of its main principles is that we are just, we are fair. Whether it be for ourselves or even against ourselves, we are commanded to be people of adl. He continues, he says, don't let your dislike or hatred for a group of people prevent you from being just with them. Right? Naturally, people fight. Naturally, people disagree. Sometimes people of different tribes, different nations, even brothers and sisters disagree. But it's a command from Allah, don't allow that dislike to lead you to a place where you're unjust to each other. I'dilu, command, be just. This is closer to righteousness. And so be aware of Allah. Indeed, Allah is aware of everything that you do. This is what we as Muslims are commanded to do. And this is, as Muslims, we expect this from other people to reciprocate it to us. And so while I was there, I saw injustice. I saw difficulty. And so we'll go through sort of day by day the different things that I had done and that I had saw. And my goal today is, as I was a witness, I would like to make you into a witness. I would like you to see firsthand what is happening so that you can do something about it as well, and we'll speak about it at the end, what you can do about it. The first trip was from here, JFK, to Cairo. Now, I'm not going to get into all of the things that took place before that, other than saying, in order for me to get permission to go, and us, I should say, there were 12 of us in my team. For us to get permission to go, we needed permission from 4 different entities. We need a permission from Egypt to come into Egypt, because the only crossing into Gaza right now is the Rafah crossing, which is through the Sinai Peninsula. We needed permission from the UN and WHO, because only they are able to take teams into Gaza. So they have to approve you and allow you to join their convoy. We needed permission from the 3rd Palestinian Authority. They have to clear you and allow you to come in. And number 4, we needed it from Israel. And as I will show you later, even though I did not meet a single Israeli while I was there, their presence is still known, is still felt throughout. You cannot forget that they are there, although you don't see them. We landed in Cairo, and we were immediately delayed. The Israelis didn't give us permission right away. We had to wait 2 days to get that permission to go in. So we had about 4 or 5 days in Cairo. We went around and we shopped. What did we shop for? Medications, diaper, formula, whatever we were told could be used in Gaza, we shopped for it. The benefit being is that as physicians going into Gaza, we can take more or less whatever we want. Whereas if you send other items, they may be delayed, we could take what we wanted as long as you could take it through an x-ray machine. So we packed, each of us, about 10 full suitcases. Medications, diapers, we even brought coffee and chocolate, coffee for the adults who worked in the hospital and chocolate for their children. These little commodities that we don't realize being here is a big deal for them. When we spoke to the doctors before we came in, we said, okay, we got the medications, we got these other things that you requested, anything else that you want? And they said, number 1, can you bring some chocolate for our children? They haven't had any for months. And number 2, can you bring coffee for us? Little things that we take for example. And I want to tell you that as we were going through the Sinai Peninsula up there, you have Cairo on the left, the blue arrow. For those of you who don't know, there's something called Google Timeline. If you want, you can Google Timeline, and it will show you every single place you have been day by day. You can pull it up. Year 2020, March 31st, it'll tell you exactly what you did that day. So when you see these maps with the blue lines, that's from my Google Timeline. So on day 1, we set out from Cairo very early in the morning. Like Fajr time didn't even come in yet. The UN caravan was ready to go. And some of us, we actually stepped out and we sort of got lost on purpose because we wanted to delay that convoy until Fajr came in. So we delayed it for about 10, 15 minutes. They were getting upset. We said, khalas, there's the adhan. We prayed Fajr and then we got on. And then through the time of Fajr, the sun rises, continuing throughout the day, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib. Finally at the time of Maghrib, we reached the border. It was a very long day. One thing that I noticed while I was doing this travel is that there were 2 types of people. One type of people in our caravan were people who were very anxious. Sometimes when you get anxious, what do? You start chatting. So they're chatting to each other about nothing, but you could tell there's anxiety in the air, there's worry. Why? Because up until this point, we were told in no uncertain terms
that this is a war zone. You are going into a place where there is active bombing taking place. Finish your will, say goodbye to your families. This is where you're going. So as we're making this ride across the Sinai, there are some people who are just anxious. They know, they're thinking about their families, they're thinking about their children, they're thinking about themselves. And then there's another group of people that were very calm, sakina. They were relaxed throughout this trip. This was a group that had already sort of taken on the mentality of the Ghazans, which I'll speak about more, in that they realized that they were going to something which inshallah will be pleasing to Allah, and if this is the way that their life was going to end, they were fine with that. They were happy. Many of my colleagues, they said, if something happens, make sure they don't bury us anywhere other than Gaza. This is where we are to be buried. Don't let them take us out. So as we're going through the Sinai, we had to go through 9 different checkpoints, Egyptian, all 9 of them through the Sinai, stopping us. Who are you? Where are you going? Show us your passport. So it was a very long day. But as I mentioned, for most of us, this was a very calm trip that we took despite the heat and the difficulties. Walhamdulillah, we reached there right at the time of Maghrib. And this is Ramadan, so right at the time of Iftar. So as we crossed into the border, we saw the sun setting. Actually, the sun set by the time we crossed in. But one thing I want to tell you about the border, at Rafah crossing, when you come into this big hall. Behind you, Egyptians. In front of you, the Palestinian Authority. And so you sit there waiting to get your visa. And as we're sitting there, it was probably about 2 hours or so, there's a camera right in the middle. And what it does, you can watch it. It stops at one person's face, examines it, goes to another person's face, examines it, and goes throughout the entire room looking at people. This camera was the Israelis. That was their presence there. They could stop whoever they wanted from exiting or entering simply based on that camera watching who's going by. And we all know they have the world's most advanced Face ID technology. They know who you are. But alhamdulillah, we managed to get through all of that, and then we crossed in. That right there is a minibus that we had taken. We had 2 of them. So we packed the inside. There were 5, 6 people, but otherwise all suitcases, and above it, all suitcases. Well, alhamdulillah, we managed to take in maybe 80 or 90 suitcases between the 12 of us, full. And to give you an idea, maybe you saw this in the beginning of the conflict. Let's see if I can get this to work. I don't think I can get the video to work. See if I can just play it. Yeah, so as we're coming to the border, we're passing by all of these trucks. And I'm sure you saw the pictures, they're still there. These trucks camped out on the side trying to get in, and they cannot get in. Full of things for the Gazan people. But you see, for us, it's just a straight line. We're just going right down the middle. And all of the suitcases we have, we actually managed to get that across. And then once you cross, you see this beautiful sign, I love Gaza. Beautiful sight for us. And right as this happened, the entire skies get dark. So our day 1 was basically this trip. Our day 1.5 is the nighttime. When you enter into Gaza, you hear a sound. As soon as we come across, you start hearing this buzzing sound. And the buzzing sound is there all of the time. You guys hear that? This is 24/7. 24/7 buzzing. Sometimes there's 1, sometimes there's 2. Very rarely do I remember it not being there. And when it wasn't there, immediately you realize, where's the sound? It's quiet. These are the drones. These are the drones that are flying up overhead. These are cameras in the sky watching the prisoners below. All the time. When you leave the house, when you come into the house, when you walk through the streets, wherever you are, they are watching you. So even though you don't see them, their presence is felt constantly. And this has been there for before the conflict. The Ghazans that I had spoken to, I asked you, what do you think about the sound? Their first reaction would be, what sound? They're used to it. And then when I pointed out to them, they said, oh, this is from even before the conflict. They've been watching us like this forever. You know, it's the imagery of like being in a camp, being in prison, where there's always that camera and the guard always watching you. That's the same sense there. And it's difficult for someone like myself. I'm American. We value our privacy. We don't like people watching us. We don't like people watching us on the internet. We don't like people watching us at our home. But here, you don't have a choice. You are constantly being watched by your enemy. And so you would have this sound constantly behind you. And then every now and then, you get another sound along with it. The interesting thing about the bombs, is that you don't hear the jet until afterwards. So normally you would think if you heard the jet, then you will hear the bombing and you get ready. But most of the time what I noticed is that if the bombing was close to you, you would hear the missile go by and then you would hear it hit concrete. And if it was far away, you would just hear the concrete. The ground would shake, you would feel the shock wave, and then after that, you hear the jet fly by. There's no warning. It's not like you can prepare yourself. It just comes, hits, then you hear the jet, and then you hear the drone continuing in the background. And some nights this happened 4, 5, 6 times. Sometimes close, sometimes far. But you just sat there. We sat there just waiting, listening. You hear the sound, all of a sudden you stop. You hear a drone, a jet, you're like, are we next? And those nights where it was a lot of them, we lived in an apartment in the residence of Rafah. So we were with the people. And we had people living above us, people living below us and next to us. So whenever the bombings got really bad or became numerous, our neighbors, Ghazans are very gracious people. They would invite us to come downstairs, have some coffee with us, have some chai with us, have some dessert. And what they would try to do is every time we would hear the jets, they would raise their voice, start talking to us directly, to take our mind off of that sound because we weren't used to it. They were, I wouldn't say they were used to it, but it was a reality for them. For us it wasn't, obviously we're new to this. And so they would come out of their gratitude, they would host us. So I'll keep talking in the meantime. That this is day 1, the day, the night. And then the next day was day 2. And the day 2 is when we now have sunlight and we're in Gaza. And now we can see what's around us. I'll tell you, the first thing I looked up was at the sky because the sky is beautiful. It's blue, some clouds, the weather was very nice while we were there. You know, you look up and you see what a beautiful place this must have been. Except for the drones in the sky, it was very nice to look at. And the weather, 80 degrees, even when it went up to 90 degrees, no humidity, it felt very nice. We're right next to the ocean, right? The Mediterranean is not that far. In fact, we went to the coast, and I'll show that to you. But the things that jump out at you first is just how beautiful it probably is. The next thing that jumps out at you are the buildings. So they have the ability to knock out a single building while other buildings immediately adjacent to it are still standing. This building on the left was, I'm standing in our balcony of our building looking out. This is what's in the backyard. Our building, perfectly fine. The building on the right of it, perfectly fine. And the building behind it, perfectly fine. This is something that you saw everywhere. Good buildings and then one that was completely bombed and dropped. And you would see the same thing with cars. Every street had a car where a missile came from the sky, hit it, and burnt it completely and destroyed it. And they were just off to the road, off the side of the road. So one thing that I noticed immediately in the daylight were these buildings and these cars. The other thing are the children. I've been to a lot of places in the world, but I've never seen so many children. It jumps out at you immediately when you look at the people, just how many kids there are. And we're talking about young kids, middle school and below. 50% of the population, they're running around everywhere, and these are kids being kids. They're having fun. They're in the street in front of our house playing soccer, running around. You know, those of us who come from other countries, third world countries, every one I've been to, the kids are the same. They're out, they play, they scream, they yell, they chase each other, they play soccer, football, and maybe cricket, depending on what part of the country you're in. This was no different. When we would come out, they would come running. And they would come running, and they only know 2 words in English. Hello, how are you? That's all they knew. So they would come running, hello, how are you? And even if we responded back and said, we're good, they wouldn't know what to say next. Or if we said, how are you? They wouldn't know what to say. They didn't know any more English than that. But yet they came with smiles every single time they saw us. They would run around chasing us, chasing our van in Gaza. You guys maybe have seen this in third world countries as well, where the bus is driving and the kids come running in the back. They jump on, they grab onto the back, and they go for a little ride. They would do that to our van. The hospitals weren't too far from each other. We would see a group of kids at one hospital. We would go down, like a quarter mile to another hospital and get out of the car. What do you see? The same kids. They followed you over. Sometimes there's no security in the hospitals. They would run up into the hospital, find us in the hospital, and say, hey, how are you? Kids are everywhere. Adults are everywhere as well. They're unemployed. There's no jobs. There's no money. There's nothing to do. There's no school. There's no education. All of the colleges, universities have been bombed and destroyed. The schools for the kids are either bombed or they're occupied by people that are displaced from the north. So no one has anything to do. They're out on the streets trying to keep occupied with whatever they can do. The other thing were donkey carts, right? Carts being pulled by donkeys. And the sad thing about that is that you would see this donkey, nothing but bones. Nothing but bones. One of the things that actually is very apparent as well is while we were in Egypt, Egypt's obesity rate is probably about the same as the United States. So it's very common to see people that are overweight. But as soon as you come into Rafah, nobody is overweight. We're talking maybe, not even a mile difference between the 2 sides of the border, but a world of a difference between the way that the people look. And just as the people had lost weight and become skinny, even the donkeys had lost weight and become skinny. So you would see these emaciated donkeys that are pulling these carts with maybe 10, 15 people on the cart, or pulling other weighted objects on this cart. So that day was my first day in the first hospital that I went to. The hospital is called Emirati Hospital. It's a maternity hospital. Maternity meaning it takes care of women, and women come there to deliver, to have children. The hospital is completely overwhelmed. In fact, every hospital is completely overwhelmed, to the point that the healthcare system has completely fallen apart and broken. So in this hospital, it is the norm. Imagine, Gaza is normally 300,000 population or so. Now you've got everyone displaced from the north coming down into the south. The population, the hospitals are designed to take care of these 300,000 people, to help them have children. Now you've got 5 times as much people, more than that. It is not designed for those numbers. So what do you see? If somebody has to have a C-section, she's waiting a long time to have that C-section. We saw times where in the wait for that C-section, the child became very sick. Didn't get enough oxygen, heart rate dropped low, and it stayed there for a long time. By the time that child is taken out of the mother, it needs to go to the ICU or it doesn't survive. I was stationed in the neonatal ICU. So in this ICU, the norm in Gaza is that children are born premature. This is the norm. Why? Because women are malnourished and they're stressed. Kids are born early. And when kids are born early, they can't usually just go home. So they end up coming into the ICU. And when they come into the ICU, if they're lucky and they make it out of there after 2 or 3 days, then alhamdulillah, that's good for them. If they're not lucky and for whatever reason they're stuck there past that, they will die in the ICU. Why? Because a child needs calories, it needs food, it needs milk. But a premature baby is not developed enough for mother's milk. There is very little artificial milk. And then IV nutrition is not available at all. So if the kid is lucky, 2 or 3 days in the ICU, it'll get out, it'll go back to mother, and they will take care of him. If not, and they're stuck, then they just become not dehydrated, they just become malnourished until they become nothing but skin and bones, and then pass away from that. We saw kids who became septic. They had bacterial infections. Even though they were literally just born and came into the ICU, they picked up these bacteria that we find in the ICUs of adults. It's as if they've been in the community around and everywhere, because there's no good way to keep the ICU clean. There's not like bleach that you can just go around and clean everything. It was difficult for us to find soap. The soap that we had was watered down. And when we would use that soap, we would just wash our hands once a day because we didn't want to run out of soap. But that's not good enough. You need to wash your hands every time you move to a new child. If we wash our hands, there was no paper towel. We would just take paper and wipe our hands dry with it. And that paper is not sterile, it's not clean. So sepsis was very high. Sanitizers, soaps are very difficult to find. And then there was crowding. These are 3 kids in an incubator. Incubators are meant for 1 kid. At times, there were 5 in one. And so you can imagine if you have these 3, like one's kicking the other and the other's kicking the third, if you have 5 of them, they're all next to each other. If one of them has an illness, he's going to pass it on to the others. So it was a very difficult situation for me to watch. The child on the left, his name is Elias. Every morning I would come into this ICU and he was in this area of the step-down unit of the ICU in a car seat, in a baby seat. I'd come, I'd pick him up, I'd play with him for a while, very cute kid. Every time you looked at him, he smiled, and then I put him down. So the first day, after some time, played with the kid, and then some other person came over, played with the kid, and so I said, who's the mother? Where's the family here? Why is this kid just being passed around from one person to another? And they said, we don't know. What do you mean you don't know? We don't know anything about the parents. He was from the north. And so when the war had started, they took a lot of the newborns and they brought them to the south to protect them. Right? When Ash-Shifa was first being bombed, they had to clear out the neonatal ICU. Those children were brought to the south. So this child came without his parents, without any family. He came as a newborn and he's been in this place since then. They don't know if the parents are alive or dead. And imagine even if the parents came today, how are they going to recognize this months-old baby from the newborn that they had last seen him as? This has become common. These kids that are orphans without any family. So we now have orphans whose entire family is known to have been martyred. They're not there. And then we have orphans where we don't know anything about the family. And chances are we'll never be able to connect them again. The next is a video, and I wanted to have the video just so you get an idea of what I'm talking about when I say they become malnourished. So you can see they just get thinner and thinner. Because there's no food for them, there's no nutrition for them. So the one on the left was lucky. He was in the ICU for a few days, he got better, and then after that they were feeding him. So you see, alhamdulillah, he looks good. But the ones in the ICU don't have that luxury. So if they don't get better quickly, they just get worse. The next day, we took a day trip. One of the hospital administrators, his name is Abu al-Bara, a very nice person, soft-spoken. You know, there's some people who by their nature, they're so calm that their calmness makes people around them calm. Right? They exude this kind of calmness. He was one of those people. Every time you spoke to him, he would smile, he'd see you, and then just a calm person. So he said to us, let me take you out one day. I'll show you Gaza. I'll show you Rafah, really. We didn't go any, we stayed in Rafah that day. So he started taking us around. In the first place, one of the first places we stopped at was the cemetery in Rafah. The cemetery in Rafah has two parts to it. There's the right side. So the first part is the distant part down there. That is before the conflict. And then there's the other side, which is the one that's closer to us in the picture. This is after the conflict. So before the conflict, you see that there's nice headstones. Everything up there has a marker. The graves are nicely built. After the conflict, now we just have cinder blocks to mark that there is a person here. And the amount of graves on one side was the same as the other side. Meaning since the conflict, the number of people that have been buried matches the number on the other side that has been there for years now. And I saw these type of people in the cemetery. There's nothing for them to do, so come out, sit at the cemetery, visit your relatives. And I thought this was a very nice kind of picture where you have this older person, younger person. I don't know if it's father and daughter, wallahu alam, I didn't speak to them. But they just sat there the entire time as we stopped, got out, and our hospital administrator, Abu al-Bara, he showed us around. So as we're going through town, one thing that you see are these tents. They're everywhere. The tents are everywhere. So all of these people that have been displaced from the north and come down to the south, there's not enough homes for them. Remember, Gaza was designed for 300,000 people. It was not designed for 1.6, 1.7 million people. So it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, if you have a job or not, young or old, you ended up in a tent with your family. So we met people who were hospital administrators. They were high up in their position, but they were living out of a tent. We met people who had nothing, and they were living out of a tent. Living in a tent is very difficult. There's no easy access to bathrooms. There's no heating, no cooling, there's no plumbing. It's just literally living in a tent. And tents aren't that big. There's not that much room. So Gazan families are not small families. It's not like American families where you have like 3 people, 4 people in a family. These are 7, 8 people families, if not more. And then when you came down with your cousins, your aunts, your uncles, your parents. You brought everyone with you. So people are crowded. I met many doctors who lived in the hospital while their families lived in tents. And I asked them, why aren't you in the tent with your family? They said, there's no room. So I decided I would come and sleep on the floor in the hospital instead. So Abu al-Bara, he brought us by this building here on the left. And he asked the driver to stop there. And so we looked around, and I want you to notice how this building, the first floor is gone. The rest of the building is still there. But the first floor is blown out. So essentially what happens is that a missile comes from the sky. It goes through the other floors and is told or designed to blow up that first floor. And they can do it for the third, they can do it for the second, they can do it for the first. Here they wanted to do it for the first. Blew out the entire floor. Abu al-Bara, as I mentioned, in his calm language, he said, I had a family of 7. Myself and my 2 oldest sons, we were in the hospital this night. And we heard the bomb go off. And when you hear the missile, when you hear the bomb, you know in the hospital, about 10 minutes, people are going to show up, dead or injured. And he said, okay, we knew it was coming, so we came down to the downstairs floor, waiting for these people to show up. And he said they started bringing in the bodies, and I recognized them. His wife and 4 daughters. And he's speaking about it, and this is one thing I noticed about all of them there, is when they spoke, everyone lost someone. Every single person without exception. But when they would speak about him, they would speak about him with sort of a matter-of-fact tone. The tears had all dried up, and instead it was, oh, I lost my mother, I lost my parents, I lost my brothers, I lost my children, I lost my family. Everyone had a story, and he, in the same way, every female in his immediate family was lost in this, and the way he had to find out was to see their bodies when they were brought to the hospital. And this isn't a one-off thing. This was something common that we experienced. The next day we took a trip. So Rafah is in the south. In fact, before I explain that, let me say it's easiest to understand Gaza from the perspective of this conflict as three places, three areas. The first is the north. The north is decimated. The north is the hellscape that you see, where all the buildings are flattened. The north is where people are dying of starvation, where they're eating grass to stay alive. The north is where the occupation will walk through and kind of kill whoever they want, however they want. We couldn't even go there. The UN said, absolutely not, you do not have permission to go to the north. In fact, there was this one time where I received a call from my administrator saying the UN wants to make a convoy of ambulances to go to the north and get the critically sick people and bring them to the south. So I said, okay, that's fine, what do you need me for? He said, if they just send Palestinians as the drivers and as the doctors to go pick up these Gazans in the north, they will kill them. But perhaps if you go as an American, they won't harm the ambulance. So I said, you want me to be a human shield? He said, yes. This is what they had planned. They wanted a convoy of ambulances, put internationals into the ambulances, so that they can go up and get the people, because it's so dangerous that a Palestinian can't make that trip. And even for us, they asked, you very well may be shot at, but we think this is the best hope. In fact, my administrator, he said specifically to me, he said, Mateen, if you're going, you need to shave your beard. Up until that point, I was okay. But when he said that, I said, wait, why? He said the Israelis are deeply racist people. And my administrator himself is a Palestinian who had been shot by the occupying force. So he's already been there, done that. And he said they're deeply racist. If they see your face with that beard, they won't hesitate. In the end, it didn't take place. I mean, the convoy didn't happen because the UN, for whatever reason, scrapped the idea. But I wanted to give you an idea of what the north is like and how going to it is an impossibility. Then there's the central part of Gaza. This is Deir al-Balah, Khan Yunis, these areas that you may hear about in the news now. This is where the invasion is currently taking place. This is where, when we traveled up to that area, we would hear the fire of the tank shelling not too far from us. We would hear the crackle of gunfire not too far from us. So this day we made a trip out to Masjid Shuhada al-Aqsa, which is in Deir al-Balah, and very close to the fighting. One thing that you notice as soon as you are getting closer to this hospital is that you all of a sudden start seeing a lot of people, crowds in the street, tents lining the street. Because people they thought that it's unlikely that they will bomb or harm the hospital. So the hospital is going to be the safest place for us to be. So as close as they could, they camped out near the hospital. So the population around this hospital was a lot more than everywhere else. So outside these gates, there's tents. And there's an area for journalists. In fact, outside of every hospital, there is an area where the journalists camp out. They're waiting, they're documenting whenever somebody injured comes in so that they could take pictures, make videos, and I'll show you some of them so that they can document what's taking place. So you find these tents outside the gates. When you go inside the gates, you see tents again. Not patients, just regular people who put up a tent hoping that if you're near the hospital, you won't get fired at. In fact, about 2 days after we made the second trip to Aqsa, they were fired at. There was a drone with a machine gun that came down, shot at the journalists, shot at the people, injuring many of them, right in front of this hospital. And then when you enter into the hospital, when you go in that main entrance into the actual building, it's the same thing. You have people just sleeping on the floor, sometimes with tents. These aren't patients. These are just people hoping to live in a place where they won't get bombed and attacked. And then you saw people, you saw patients everywhere. This hospital is not designed for this number of people. Patients are on the floors, they're on whatever beds there may be available, they're sleeping next to each other, they've got IVs on the ground. And this isn't ground like our hospitals where we bleach it every single day and clean it up. This is dust on the floor. This is old blood on the floor. Not yours, someone else's. And then you have an injured person laying in that. So this is the situation of Aqsa. In fact, this is the situation of most hospitals. On the left is a picture from Aqsa. So when you come in injured, when you come in as a patient, the first place you go is to the floor. Not to a bed, there's no beds available. You go to a floor. And then on the floor you can see there's dried blood, there's other fluids. These children have IVs that are they're on the floor, IVs going up and being hung on something. Oxygen being attached to them while they're laying on the floor. This was the situation of their emergency department. The child on the right is the first child that I saw when I came into the emergency department. This is a child, he was about, I want to say 4 or 5 years old. When a bomb goes off, when a missile hits, there's multiple layers of injuries that take place. So when it goes off, if you're close to it, you will be incinerated by the fire, by the explosion itself. If you're further away, then it shoots out shrapnel, debris, and you will be hit by that debris. You could almost say that the people who were next to the missile, they were the lucky ones, they died instantly. The injuries that we would see of those that managed to survive were the shrapnel injuries. This boy was close enough that he burnt his face and took a beating to the face, multiple lacerations that have already been closed up in this picture, and then areas of burn on his face. You can see on his body, he's got all of these marks. This is from the shrapnel that came. He was wearing clothing, so it didn't penetrate into the skin, but you can see all of the marks that are there. They didn't have morphine for this kid. They didn't have pain medication for this kid. We just had to give him a sedative. So we just made him sleepy. And so then he was just groaning softly rather than loudly. This is sad. But what was really heartbreaking is that you can see kind of on the bottom there's a shoe right here. That's his father. His father, and this is a scene that I saw repeatedly over and over again. Whenever you saw a child hurt, there is going to be a father sitting on the ground with his face in his hands crying. Why? Every single one of us, and I'm looking out and I see many fathers in the room, it is from our paternal instinct that we protect our families. We protect our children. It is part of being a man to be a protector. And when your child is injured, you have this sense of failure. It was my job to protect my son and I wasn't able to. Even though not a single person in the world would blame him for this, it is completely out of his control. But as a father, if your child gets hurt, you feel responsible. It was your job to protect him, you did not. And the same thing goes from mothers. We saw the children in the ICU. The maternal instinct is to feed your child. For 9-10 months you fed the child. And then when the child is born, it is your maternal instinct to feed these children, but you cannot. Why? The child is too young to suckle. The child is too young to drink. And we had nothing else to give through an IV. So for a mom to watch their own child get skinnier and skinnier and skinnier until they stop breathing, there's a sense of failure there. Not your fault, but a sense of failure. I thought I'd throw in one nice picture. This is the Mediterranean. As we would drive up and down the coast, we would look out, and this was a beautiful sight. I can easily imagine Gaza, had it been left alone, had it been allowed to trade, had its borders not been closed off, that it would be a destination that Muslims from all over the world would come to enjoy its waters, to sit on its beaches, to meet its people. And these are the most beautiful people. And there is such iman in that area that if it was allowed to go out to the rest of the world, like Imam al-Shafi'i, who was from there and went out and benefited the entire world, these people could do the same. There is some sad part to this beach, though. The sad part to it is that I couldn't capture it in the picture, but if you were to look far enough on the horizon, there were gunships. Not one or two, but all along you could see them. Throughout the day, we would see people brought to the emergency department, shot while they were fishing. There's not enough food in Gaza, but they have this beautiful ocean next to them. The ocean is full of food and fish. And fish, they don't come up to the sea, come up to the shore, they stay out a little bit. They're not dumb. So you have to go out after them. But if you went out too far, you got shot. And so we would see these fishers brought into the emergency department with bullet holes. Shot. For what? For trying to get some food. So although the ocean was beautiful, there was a downside to it as well. And then drownings as well. We saw plenty of those. The ICU was, for me personally, frustrating, tiring. Why? Because one, I'm an emergency physician. I do take care of kids, but I don't take care of newborns. If there's a newborn in the emergency department, I'm trying to send that kid to some other place where they can take care of him. I don't do that. So one, it was tiring and frustrating because it's not my field. And number two, after everything I told you right now, how much can I as a doctor do? If I don't have a ventilator to put you on, I can't breathe for you. If I don't have antibiotics and other medications to give you, I can't help you with your infection. If I don't have nutrition to give you, I can't help you with that. So that was me there for about 3 or 4 days. Imagine what it must have been like for the doctors. You're a neonatologist, and these are brilliant doctors. These are very well-educated, capable doctors. But you can be well-educated, you can be smart, you can be really good at what you do, but if you don't have the tools to do it, it becomes very frustrating. So first thing for them is that they're frustrated for not being able to take care of people in the way that they know they should be able to take care of them. They're frustrated because they're living out of tents. They're frustrated because their family has died or dying. Most of you guys, most of us, if you personally have an emergency or your family has an emergency, do you go to work? You don't. You call in, I need a family emergency, I need a sick day, I'm not coming. They can't do that. There is nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. You come to work to do what you can do. So even though you're living out of a tent, even though you can't do your job properly, even though your family has died, you still come to work. And you're not paid. There's no money. So you're working there as a doctor or a nurse or a technician, and you haven't been paid. You're volunteering. So what's the end result? You become a zombie. You're there, but mentally you're checked out. Emotionally you're checked out. And so this is what we would see, and what I had seen in that ICU. In fact, later I would realize that this is every single hospital. But I had asked to come out of that ICU and go into an emergency department because that's my field. And I ended up in the next hospital, which is Najjar Hospital. Najjar Hospital was like Aqsa. It was crowded. There were tents outside. Not as bad as Aqsa, but people were trying to seek refuge. Najjar Hospital was made for Rafah, for 300,000 population. Now we're looking at 5-6 times that amount. It was crowded. It was occupied. And you saw healthcare collapse. Your primary care doctor doesn't have an office anymore. There's no specialist to go to. So if you're a diabetic, you are lucky if you have your medications, and if you have your medications, there's no one to follow it. It's difficult to check your sugars. You don't necessarily have that anymore. If you're a cancer patient, forget about it. There's no cancer treatment. Zero. It's not available in all of Gaza. The clinics have been destroyed, and even if they weren't destroyed, there's no medications. There isn't any. There's no chemotherapeutic agents anymore. It's not available. There's no radiation therapy, none of it. Every time you ask a specialist, what are we going to do about this problem? Oh, after the war. This was the solution, after the war. I have a patient who is a very bad diabetic. He could use X, Y, and Z. After the war, brother. This person needs an operation. After the war. So everything was being put down for later. So the entire healthcare system has collapsed. When you come into the emergency department, half of your patients are trauma, other half are medical. Meaning, had they had primary care, had they had specialists, they wouldn't be in the ICU. In the ER. But there's nowhere else to go. They wait until they get sick, and then they show up. A lot of people don't have shoes. Adults, most of them have shoes, because adults don't outgrow their shoes. So who doesn't have shoes? Kids don't have shoes. They outgrow it and they're out in the streets running, so whatever shoes they have get destroyed. So most children did not wear shoes, flip-flops, nothing. Again, third world country. It's not concrete and pavement on the road. It's dirt, it's dust, it's rocks, and rocks tear up your feet. You get lacerations, you get cuts. So you come into the emergency department, or you're a diabetic and you get a cut to your foot. You come into the emergency department, we give you some antibiotics, we stitch up your foot closed, and then we discharge you. But what happens next? What do you think happens next when they leave the hospital? They still don't have shoes. So they go back out and those cuts open right back up again. These are completely preventable problems. From start to finish, everything I've told you is preventable, easily preventable, could have been stopped, but is ongoing as a fast way of killing them and as a slow way of killing them. This was the emergency department. This is just one picture of it. And as you see, there's a person lying on the floor. When you come in, there's no stretchers available. First thing you do is you go to the floor. You see a lot of staff members, right? You see the person in green, the person in blue. There's many, the ones wearing white lab coats. They're there. But mentally, they're not there. So they were happy to see people like us who were fresh, meaning mentally we were okay and so we could do the job. But they were there. The other thing in this picture is that person who says press on the back. And as I had mentioned to you, the journalists are there. So whenever something would take place, they would come into the ER, take pictures and videos so that they could document what's happening. And this was common. As far as resources go for those guys who are medical healthcare related, in all of Rafah, we had one CT scanner. And you can imagine when we're having this level of trauma, that CT scanner is being used for that constantly. In this hospital, we did not have CT. If I needed a CT emergently, I had to send to that other hospital, which was already taking people from other places for that one CT. Before I had left, that one CT broke. It took days to convince the Israelis to let a Jordanian come in with the parts to fix it. In the meantime, that CT scanner wasn't there. X-rays we had, MRI, in the entirety of Gaza, there is no MRI. That kind of workup is not being done. So just to give you again, person comes, they're on the floor, you can see the blood, you can see the dirt next to him. This is what the floors look like. There's nobody who's cleaning this. And then Najjar Hospital, to give you an idea of what it's like, when you walk in through the main entrance, in front of you is the ER entrance, and then is the inpatient entrance for the people who are hospitalized. Next to it, if you keep walking straight, on the left there's the masjid. So the masjid is right attached to the hospital. And in between the masjid and the hospital, there's an open area, a sahel, where I imagine that before people would come, perhaps eat there, meet there, go and relax there for a little bit before they went back to their jobs. That now became their morgue. Anytime you walk by, there were new bodies on the ground. Some in their kathan, some in body bags, but always bodies lying on the ground. People who had just died, people who were just injured. And here you see this scene in the picture was a common one. There were janaza salat going on all day long, one after the other after the other. And the other scene was watching people crying next to these bodies. Coming in, identifying, yes, this is my brother. Oh yes, this is my child. One day, we heard the missile, we heard the bomb. I'm in the emergency department. So like I said, I know 10 minutes we're going to see people coming. So all of a sudden these people come running into the emergency department with this 7-year-old girl. They bring her in. We immediately saw that she was very sick, cleared out the stretcher, put her on it in our trauma bay over there. I wasn't there at the very beginning. By the time, before I got there, the doctors felt her pulse, saw she was breathing. They put a tube down, started breathing for her, and put a tube on the side of her chest. Why? She was hit by shrapnel. So one big piece of shrapnel hit her in the cheek, and you can see how it's just ripped away, that part of the cheek. The other one went into the left side of her chest. And she needed a tube to get that blood out. But if it went into the left side of the chest, your lung and your heart is on that side. So they put the tube in, they got blood out, and around that time is when I walked in. And when I walked in, I looked at this child, and my first words to the other doctors was, I don't think her heart's beating. Walked up, looked for a pulse, checked for it, her heart had stopped. The rule in Gaza right now is if someone's heart stops, you stop. Because if you were to continue to try to resuscitate this person and get the heart back again, what are you going to do after that? There's no ICU to send them to, and if there is an ICU to send them to, but the ventilators and other machines are being used for a person who has a high chance of living, it's not going to be used for the person whose heart just stopped. So if your heart stopped, we stopped. This girl's heart stopped, and we stopped. So as soon as we called this code and said, okay, we're done, I walked out, I opened the door to this room, and it was the same thing. I walked out, I looked to the left, there's a man sitting on the floor with his hands, with his face in his hands, crying. Immediately I knew this is a father. And there's nothing you can do for this person. You can sit, you can talk, you can say, but what's going to make up for his baby girl? While I was there, I didn't take a lot of pictures, not of patients, not of family members. I didn't take any videos. I was ashamed. I'm from America. The planes that are flying overhead, they're made in our country. The missiles that are coming down, they're made in my country. The money that's funding this, it's from my country. The people that are protecting the ones who are causing this genocide, it is my country. So I was ashamed. How dare I come there and take pictures of these people? In fact, I would have thought that someone somewhere would have looked at me and said, "You're from America? How dare you come? How dare you?" No one ever said that. I was only met with smiles. Every time I said I'm from America, all we heard was this dua for us. That, Jazakallah khair for coming. May Allah bless you, may Allah reward you. Happy smile, you're from America. Oh, welcome, ahlan wa sahlan. This is all we got from them. When I'm sure had it been one of us or someone else, they would have been angry to see us. That your country, you're the ones who caused all of this? You want to show up here? So I didn't take pictures, I didn't take videos, but as I mentioned, the journalists are there. So the next day afterwards, I received this video of the same girl that I had helped to take care of. And I'm going to make you see this for the same reason that I just said. It's our tax dollars, it's our money that is funding, that caused the death of this girl and the grief of the father who's standing and crying over her.
والله حرمونا منك يابا، والله خذونا منك، الله يسلمك.
And this is common, meaning this isn't a one-off thing that I just happened to see. This was a daily thing that we saw there. There is a process called deconfliction. What deconfliction means is that you tell Israel that we would like to go to this area or we would like to stay in this area. Is it okay? And if Israel says, yes, it's okay, that's basically their way of saying, we're not going to bomb the area right now. So that area becomes deconflicted. So when we got our apartment to live in, we had to tell Israel, we are going to stay in this hospital, in this area, in this building. Is it okay? And they would respond back saying, yes, deconflicted. Every time we traveled from one place to another, we would tell Israel, tomorrow we would like to leave from our apartment, go through this route to this hospital or this area. Is it okay? And they would respond back saying, yes, it's deconflicted, or no, it's not. If it's not, we didn't leave. If it was, we left. Up until while we were there, no international that followed the process of deconfliction was harmed. So we felt somewhat safe that if Israel said, yes, you can go, it's deconflicted, then we felt somewhat safe that we can do it. And so this is what we did. We left, we stayed, we went everywhere on the hope that we could trust them for it. How many of you have heard of the WCK employees that were killed? The World Central Kitchen. This is from my Google timeline. The blue line is the route that we took. Just a part of it. But I want you to show you that that's the road that we took right across the Mediterranean. As I said again, it was beautiful. You know, as I'm going down this route, and we did it maybe 4 or 5 times, every time all I do is just stare at the water. There's kids playing in the water. There's trash everywhere. But still, you can look past that and you can enjoy it. 2 days after this trip that we took, the WCK group took this trip. So this blue line you're seeing is the line that we did. It's also the line that they took. They went through the same process. The night before, they told Israel, we are going to take this route. Is it deconflicted? Israel said, yes, it's deconflicted. They got into 3 cars and they started driving up the road. The first X on the bottom left is when a missile came from the sky and took out one of the cars of the WCK group. So the other 2 cars came back around, picked up the survivors from the 3rd car, and they started driving now 2 cars. The second X in the middle, Israel hit them again, took out another car. The 1 car that's surviving now came back, picked up whatever survivors, and started going again. The 3rd X took out the last car. So if anyone tells you this is an accident, it's clear it's not an accident. In fact, Israel eventually said, yes, it was not an accident. An accident is, oops, we hit a car. An accident is not 1, 2, 3, until you've wiped out everyone in that caravan. I wanted to show you this because I want to give you an idea that 2 days before we took this route and we felt safe. After this, no one feels safe. Because even if it's deconflicted, it doesn't mean anything. They can still kill you from above. This was their car. Again, just to give you an idea of what they can do, you see the hole in the roof? That's a missile. A missile with the capability of coming down, penetrating just the exact area that they want to hit, and then taking out everyone in the car. Or taking out a few in the car, whatever they want. And then the other vehicle was burned completely. Before I finish, let me tell you something about the Gazan people. And this is important. Throughout this story that I'm telling you, there's difficulty, there's hardship, and many a time I would hear one Gazan saying to another, when they had lost their child, when they had lost their relative, comforting them by saying, it is better for them to be in Jannah than to be in Gaza. Reminding each other that yes, you lost a family member, but now they don't have to live in this Jahannam that we call Gaza. They're now in Jannah relaxing and enjoying. The Ghazan people are amazing people. As I mentioned, they're gracious, they're grateful, they're generous. To give you an idea of their generosity, we were told multiple times that you do not eat the food of the Ghazans because they don't have enough food for themselves. You can't be coming out from outside in and eating their food as well. So we took protein bars, we took camping food. I personally took enough food so that I wouldn't have to eat any of their food the entire time they were there. I was going to live off of protein bars, my camping food, whatever was needed. I took enough food for like 15, 16 days. I ate 2 days worth. Why? Because every single day at iftar and for dinner, they brought us food. These people who are already lacking for food said, you came from outside, you're our guests, here's food. At first we said, no, we can't do this, we can't eat. You're bringing us food, we are overweight people from the Americas. We can't be taking this from you. But they insisted. This is Muslim generosity, this is Ghazan generosity. You couldn't say no to them. So we accepted it. There's a Palestinian dish called maqluba. I would describe it as like the biryani for them. It takes time to prepare. It's amazing. It has chicken in it. Before I mention the chicken part, when we first arrived there was no meat. It was only vegetables and rice, because you couldn't find meat. And then while we were there, so chicken started to make its way into Gaza. So what was amazing is that as chicken came into Gaza, we got chicken. We were like the first people. They would bring it for us. There was one day I remember where I went to the hospital in the morning, and the rumor in the hospital, the talk of the town was, there's beef in Gaza today. There's no cows in Gaza. So it's coming from outside. Somehow a shipment made its way in. So now for these 2 million people, perhaps they could get some beef. And that night, we come home, iftar and then dinner, and there's beef. For us, we are people who eat beef every day here, maybe multiple times a day. And these are people who didn't see it for a long time. They finally got it and they brought it for us. So their generosity is something I've never experienced before. But speaking about maqluba, just to finish the thought, it takes time to make. It has chicken in it. It has a lot of care and love into it. And we ate it maybe 4 or 5 times while we were there. Different people making it for us. As I had mentioned, everyone has a story, a bad story, a story of loss, a story of difficulty. Family members, some people 10, 50, 100. There's still a tribal sort of mentality in Palestine where people know each other by their tribes, and people of one tribe tend to live together. Meaning this is a town, and the majority of people in the town are related to each other one way or another. That old school type of feel. Everyone, when a town will be bombed, then you wiped out a portion of a tribe, if not the entire tribe, in doing that. But they are resilient. They have been bombed before. Borders have been closed for a very long time. They have been forgotten for a very long time. But despite all of that, they are resilient. But even that resiliency is starting to show its cracks now. I asked multiple people, what is different now? Why is it now that I am starting to see cracks? And they said, this is the worst we've ever had. Since the 40s, 50s, since the Nakba, even including the Nakba, it wasn't as bad as this. This was a consensus. This is the worst we've ever had it. So I saw people starting to crack, wondering, where is the help of the Ummah? Where is relief? Who is actually standing up for us? Who is going to make a difference for us? On the right top is a couple. I'm not talking about the older gentleman to the left, the two young ones in the middle. Husband and wife. Both doctors, just recently finished med school. The sad story is that if you're in medical school, both the medical schools in Gaza have been destroyed. Right? There's no terrorist headquarters, there's none of that. They just destroyed it. So now there is no, even if the war were to end, there is no med school to train that next generation of doctors that can now take care of the hundreds of thousands that are injured. If you're a medical student, you don't have a future right now. You worked so hard to get to medical school, you got to medical school, your school is destroyed. In fact, if you were studying anything in Gaza, all of the universities and colleges are gone. There's no education for them. There's no education even for the kids. Those schools are either occupied by people trying to live in it or they've been destroyed. There's no education. Right? We often see people in our parts of the world make such a big deal about education. In fact, look down upon the rest of the world. You don't educate your women, you don't educate your children. Where's the outrage now? You've destroyed all the schools, you've destroyed all the colleges and universities. Why is that not a priority for you now? These two finished medical school, but they don't have a way of continuing their training now. So they're stuck, right? Young couple, they're looking at their future ahead of them. Each one wants to specialize in something. The man's name is Amir. Rima is the wife. Amir and Rima met me every single morning. They were my translators. Right? I'm not good with Amiya. Amiya Arabic, especially Palestinian, there's a lot of aishes and laishes. I can't follow that. So they would come and they would translate for me. Every morning they'd come, even on days that they were off, they don't have to be there. They came, they translated, they worked with me the whole day. I would teach them whatever I could, and then they would go home and they come back the next day. But I had a difficult time leaving them, knowing that there's nothing in sight for them now to finish their training. The gentleman in the bottom, next to me, are two ER physicians in Najjar. The one directly next to me, the one whose hand I have around his shoulder, his name is Dr. Muhyiddin. Dr. Muhyiddin is Ghazan, born and raised. He speaks Bangladeshi. He spent 6 years in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, studying medicine. So it was interesting. Amazing person. The reason I put his picture is that he is truly one of the most amazing people I've ever met. He's only 30 years old. He's not married yet, no children. He has dedicated himself to the hospital and to the emergency department. He has took this little hospital and he has expanded it. He has made it capable of taking care of this level of population. Despite the resources, he has gone out of his way to become very MacGyver-ish, to figure out ways to make things happen that normally everyone else would just give up on. He is a man, one day I pulled him to the side and I said, listen, you're 30 years old, you're extraordinarily gifted, you know medicine really well, you don't have any children, you know as well as I know that if you can raise $5,000, you can bribe your way out of here and go and live in America, live in Canada, go to Europe. You can raise a family, get married, and you can set yourself and your generations by doing that. Why don't you do it? Because I met other people who were trying to do that. In fact, it was very common to meet people who were trying to raise money so that they could bribe their way out of Gaza. As I mentioned, most of them don't want to leave their land. They don't ever want to leave their land. But the situation is the worst they've ever seen it, and they are just in survival mode. But Dr. Muhyiddin was not. Very calm. He is one of those people, وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلَ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that whoever places their trust in Allah, Allah is sufficient for them. Allah will take care of all of their needs. He was of that mentality. In fact, I would say the majority of the Ghazan people are of this mentality. When I speak to you about their iman, I meet people Individuals, maybe one, maybe two in each community, whose iman is like, through the skies, who has complete reliance upon Allah no matter what the difficulty. This is the first place I've ever been where it's the norm for the population. Here it's the exception, over there it's the norm. Here we rely upon our bank accounts, our degrees, our jobs, our parents, our families. If we ever get into trouble, we tell ourselves, you know what, I have 100,000 K in the bank, I'll be fine. Or I have this degree, I'll get a job. These are people who truly understand the word tawakkul, that there is no one who you can rely upon besides Allah. And in some ways, it's amazing, but on the other way, it's sad. Why is it sad? The reason that they have been forced to turn to Allah is because the rest of the world has turned away from them. There is no one to turn to. Right? Before the conflict started, the Abraham Accords, the Arab world basically moved past them, started normalizing ties with Israel. Netanyahu went in front of the UN with a map with Palestine not even on the map. From the perspective of the Palestinians and the Gazans, the world had forgotten about them or decided they no longer care about them. So who do you have besides Allah? And so this was their mentality. I would have patients come into the emergency department. Every patient that came in as a trauma who thought he was dying, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah. Or Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakil, Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakil. In a state of constant dhikr, waiting for their death. Dr. Muhyiddin, I asked him, why don't you leave? And he said something that instantly in my eyes made him the most beautiful of people. He said that I trained to become a doctor. I became an emergency physician so that if this day ever came, I would be there to take care of it. Meaning if the day ever came where my people needed me, where this land needed me, I will be there. Why would I leave now? Perfectly content, perfectly happy. If I die at 30 years old without wife, without children, Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakil. Allah is sufficient for me and He is the best of caretakers. So I'll finish with this. While I was there, I saw a lot of organizations doing work. And there are a lot of organizations doing work. I put up just 3 of them as people that you can help out, because I directly saw the work that they were doing. Number 1, I would ask that you become educated about what's happening. Once you become educated, then you advocate. You tell your friends, you tell your family, you tell your coworkers. You don't have to vilify anybody, but you can at least speak up about the plight that's taking place. You don't have to point fingers necessarily, but you can at least point at the reality of the atrocities that's taking place. And you can educate people. And then number 2, you can assist those people that are going there and that are working there. There are organizations, I just put up a couple of them. First, UNRWA. UNRWA became very famous when Israel accused some of its members as being terrorists and involved in October 7th. Since then, we have come to know that that is a baseless claim without any proof to it. But they made the allegation in a lot of countries, including the United States and UK, stopped funding it. Now, just about every other country has resumed funding it, except for the United States, UK, and I think one other country that I don't remember. However, even though our country is not funding it, you can. This is their website. When you go on it, it'll take you to the American page, completely legal for Americans to donate to it. And there's no reason why we cannot. No one has a bigger footprint. No one has been doing more work in Gaza and entire Palestine than UNRWA has been, and no one has been doing it longer. I wanted to put a slide of WCK. I didn't before because after that bombing, they stopped working in Gaza. But just recently, like 2 or 3 days ago, they resumed. So you can just Google WCK, World Central Kitchen. While I was there, besides UNRWA, WCK gave out the most food. Every single day for iftar, they packed ambulances with food, and the ambulances would come one after another to the hospitals and distribute food to every patient and the family that is there with the patients and the staff that's working as well.